questions on the topic of culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with George Haraksin. Thank you for joining us.
Always fun to be here.
You know, you are a professor of ethics. You're also a former pastor.
Yep.
And so you're well equipped to answer this question or lots of questions on the topic of, did Jesus really say that he was God? So let's start there, because that's a common question that skeptics and, believe it or not, Christians have as well, is did Jesus ever claim to be God? So did he?
Yeah. Some preliminary thoughts when answering that question, because how to answer that kind of depends on your context. When I was in India on a missions trip, and if I said Jesus claimed to be God, they'd be like, yeah, of course, and there's other gods too, you know, along those lines. But I was a comparative religions major, I got a degree there. And, you know, if Jesus was just a human being, we could add his wisdom to sort of what I would call the common core of religious wisdom and how to live life. But if he claimed to be more than that, then we really need to take a second look. And of course, being a Christian, I do think that he claimed more than that. And when I was in my comparative religions degree, that was something I really had to seek out, had to go deep with, because I had Jewish professors, I had Hindu professors in that, and so that question regularly came up. So I do think he claimed to be God, but we also have to ask, what do we mean by God? And kind of, if someone's asking that question, and we can even ask it of ourselves, but can you give me a description of the God you're referring to? Because that's going to make a big difference. If we're thinking about the God of Aristotle or Plato, that's more of a distant deistic God, created the world but not necessarily involved with the world. If we're talking about a plurality of gods, that's going to be something different. But if we're talking about the Hebrew God, well, that's a very particular kind of God who has entered into time and space. So I think we want to help ourselves and gently help other people raise those issues to make sure we're kind of on the same page.
And I appreciate that, because I think when people ask questions, sometimes people are ready to respond, they have a canned response, and they haven't actually kind of defined the terms. Well, what do you mean by God? Because it can be lowercase g God, like hanging out with all the other gods, or a God that's all-powerful, all-knowing, and personal, and deeply aware of who we are.
It's funny, there's actually a video game out now where it's called Fight of Gods, and you pick different gods, or you can be Buddha, or you can be Zeus, and you fight against another god, and one of those is Jesus. Oh, wow. And it's interesting. I was at the Evo convention and watching them play this game, and to some people, you know, God is a video game character, you know, so I think we have to surface these ideas for people.
Well, I think that's a great way to start. So when you've now established that people are asking if Jesus claimed to be uppercase G God, then we can start to ask maybe the next question, like who specifically did Jesus claim to be?
Yeah, I think it's Ben Witherington who says this, that we, in our current culture, we live in a Jesus-haunted culture. And so Jesus is in the background there somewhere. We have some faint memory of him. I even know of an account where a person was buying a necklace, and she said, well, what's the one with the guy on the plus sign? Oh. You know, and so we have a faint memory of Jesus. So I think we actually have to go back and to the text and to that Hebrew worldview of what Jesus was claiming to be. So in the Hebrew context, think of the Old Testament, the time when Jesus lived, the Hebrew understanding of God was that God, yes, was the sole creator of the world, the only wise God, but that God wanted to be intimately involved with the world and seek out his people to redeem them, to rescue them away from their sin, bondages, etc. So Jesus in that context is identifying himself in a deep and even an intimate way with of Yahweh in the Old Testament. Now, I think also what we have to help people do in a Jesus-haunted culture is remind them what are the best sources to go to when discovering what Jesus, said. It's not a video game. It's not some of the movies from the 70s or whenever that refer to Jesus. It's not Talladega Nights, or whatever.
Oh, a little 8-pound,
little 8-pound little baby Jesus. But rather, we have to go to what are the reliable sources. And numerous scholars, and I would agree with them that I think the best sources to find out what Jesus claimed to be is the New Testament and the Old Testament, the Bible as we call it. So, but specifically the Gospels themselves. Okay. Now, if we look there, here's what we'll find. We find that Jesus uses the phrase or the title Son of Man to identify himself. He really likes that title. And this is before the crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And just for one reference for people, take Matthew chapter 9, verse 6. He says this. He says, "But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And then he says, this is over to the paralytic, he says, "Stand up and take your stretcher and go home." So right there is a pointer. Not only is he using the title Son of Man, but he's claiming to be able to forgive sins of someone that didn't necessarily sin against him. Like if I did something against you, it would make sense for you to go, well, I'll forgive you, if you ask me. But it would be weird for you to come into a room and say, I forgive everyone's sin here, right? That's a little bit different kind of a weightiness.
Yeah, that's some sort of complex.
Right, right. So I think that title, Son of Man, then we'll look back into places like Daniel chapter 7, where Son of Man has a very distinct descriptive that Jesus then fulfills.
So now Jesus is claiming to have authority to forgive sin. So there's a sign that he may not have outright said, "I am God," but this is all leading up to that, correct?
Right. So in that claim, Jesus, I think, remember there's a progression going on. He's now taking on human flesh. He's revealing who he is, and he has to be sensitive to the context and help people understand who he is, right? So in that process, I think Jesus makes both implicit and also explicit claims to be God. And just to give you a couple of examples, let's take one implicit claim. So in this case, actually going back, it was C.S. Lewis who I read that made this observation. And he says, Jesus makes this curious statement. He's giving these woes over to Jerusalem for them not following God, abandoning God, not doing justice, and those types of things. And then he says this. He is looking onto the city, and he says, I keep sending you, and I'm going to send you prophets and wise men. Now, who sends the prophets? Who says the wise? It's God that does that. And he's subtly there. You could just read right past that passage, but Jesus is putting himself in the place of God. I'm sending you these prophets. So that's an implicit case where I think Jesus says that. Now there's more explicit places as well. Like for instance, when he meets up right around his trial and he engages Caiaphas, the high priest. Let me read just a little from that. He says, Caiaphas asked Jesus if he is the Christ, the Son of the Blessed. And then Jesus replies, he says this, "I am." It's a very distinctive statement, equating himself with Yahweh. "And you will see the Son of Man," there's that title again, "seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And in response, we get a little clue there because Caiaphas rips, his garment and he claims blasphemy there, right? So we get an indication of by his reaction, the weightiness of Jesus' claim. Now, if we had time, we could go through, let's say, the Gospel of John, where there's many I am statements. And one of those statements, specifically in chapter 8, is a very firm declaration and reference back to the Old Testament where God says, "I am."
Right. Well, that definitely gives us some clues. And I know you said that, like, if we had time, we can go more into this topic. We don't have a ton of time here because I know, like, there's a bunch that we can say about the Old Testament prophecy of the Messiah coming and how that aligns with Christ's arrival, and does it actually match?
Right.
Plenty more to say there. Is there anything else you want to add before we point people to some resources?
We can point people. Hugh actually has a nice little article on our website about those various prophecies, about Micah's prediction, about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem, about the crucifixion being foretold in the Old Testament, and the suffering Savior. So those are things you can go to. A couple of other resources. I mentioned C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis's God in the Dock has a chapter entitled "What Are We to Make of Jesus Christ?" Ken, my colleague, your colleague, fellow philosopher and theologian, his book is really, really good, God Among the Sages, because it gives you a picture of who Jesus is, but then it also compares and contrasts to other world religious leaders. Yeah. There's one final resource, a little bit more advanced, from Ben Witherington, who I mentioned earlier, called The Christology of Jesus, and that's really like eating a steak dinner. It really gives you a lot to chew on.
Nice and meaty.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, George. So he's given some options from our easy access Hugh article on our website to this book by Ben Witherington, and in between there is God Among Sages. That is on support.reasons.org, a fantastic book by Kenneth Samples. If you want to hear more from George Haraksin, go to reasons.org and search for George Haraksin.